On September 12, 1933, a Hungarian physicist stood waiting to cross Southampton Row in London's Bloomsbury district, pondering an article he had just read in the Times. Ernest Rutherford, the greatest experimental physicist of the age, had dismissed the possibility of extracting useful energy from atomic nuclei as moonshine, unworthy of serious consideration. Leo Szilard, unemployed, penniless, and driven by an intuition he could not yet articulate, felt a surge of anger at Rutherford's certainty. As the traffic light changed and Szilard stepped off the curb, the idea struck him with perfect clarity. If you could find an element that, when struck by a neutron, released two neutrons, you could start a chain reaction. Each neutron would split another nucleus, releasing more neutrons, which would split more nuclei in an exponentially growing cascade. The energy locked inside matter could be released in a torrent. Szilard understood immediately that he had conceived something unprecedented and terrifying. Leo Szilard was born on February 11, 1898, in Budapest, Hungary, into a prosperous Jewish family. His father was a civil engineer who owned a construction business. Leo showed early intellectual brilliance, excelling in mathematics and physics. He studied engineering at the Budapest Technical University before serving briefly in the Austro-Hungarian army during World War I. After the war, he moved to Berlin to study physics, earning his doctorate under Max Planck in 1922 with a dissertation on thermodynamics. Szilard worked alongside Albert Einstein, collaborating on a patent for an electromagnetic refrigerator with no moving parts. He was more interested in ideas than credentials, filing numerous patents and proposing inventions that ranged from practical to visionary. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Szilard, recognizing the danger immediately, fled Germany and settled in London. Szilard's chain reaction concept was revolutionary because it required no external energy input beyond the initial neutron. Once started, the reaction would sustain itself, releasing energy far exceeding anything achievable through chemical reactions. Szilard understood that this could produce power for civilization or weapons of unimaginable destruction. In 1934, he filed a patent application with the British Patent Office describing the process of neutron-induced chain reactions. The patent was detailed, specifying elements like uranium and thorium as candidates. Szilard was desperate to keep the idea secret, fearing that hostile governments might develop atomic weapons. He asked the British government to classify the patent. The Patent Office refused. Szilard then approached the British Admiralty, arguing that the chain reaction could produce bombs very many thousand times more powerful than ordinary bombs. The Admiralty agreed, and in 1936 the patent was classified and assigned to the Admiralty. For the next few years, Szilard searched for an element that would sustain a chain reaction. He conducted experiments at various laboratories, testing different materials, but lacked the resources and equipment to make decisive progress. Nuclear fission had not yet been discovered, so Szilard's concept remained theoretical. In December 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered that uranium nuclei could be split into lighter elements, releasing energy. Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch, working in Sweden, provided the theoretical explanation in January 1939, coining the term fission. The news electrified the physics community. Szilard, now in the United States, immediately recognized that fission was the mechanism he had envisioned. Uranium nuclei, when struck by neutrons, split and released additional neutrons. The chain reaction was possible. Szilard moved quickly. In January 1939, he traveled to New York and began collaborating with Enrico Fermi at Columbia University. Fermi, an Italian Nobel laureate who had fled fascist Italy, was one of the world's leading physicists. Together with physicist Walter Zinn, Szilard and Fermi conducted experiments to determine if uranium fission released multiple neutrons. On March 3, 1939, they confirmed it. Each uranium nucleus that underwent fission released approximately 2.4 neutrons on average. The chain reaction was not just possible. It was inevitable if the conditions were right. Szilard realized that the world was racing toward a catastrophe. If Germany developed an atomic bomb first, the consequences would be unimaginable. Szilard tried to convince physicists to stop publishing research on fission, arguing that any information might help enemy scientists. Some agreed, but others, particularly Fermi and the French physicist Frédéric Joliot-Curie, continued publishing. Szilard grew increasingly desperate. He understood that scientific openness, normally a virtue, had become a liability. Information about neutron emissions, moderators, and uranium isotopes was being published in journals accessible to German scientists. Szilard pleaded with colleagues to observe voluntary censorship, but his warnings were largely ignored. The culture of science prioritized sharing knowledge, not hiding it. Szilard, frustrated and terrified, concluded that the only solution was to alert the United States government and urge immediate action to develop an atomic bomb before Germany did. In July 1939, Szilard decided to contact President Franklin D. Roosevelt directly. He knew that a letter from an unknown Hungarian physicist would be ignored, so he enlisted Albert Einstein, the most famous scientist in the world. On July 12, 1939, Szilard and his colleague Eugene Wigner drove to Einstein's summer cottage on Long Island. Szilard explained the chain reaction concept, the possibility of atomic bombs, and the danger that Germany might develop such weapons first. Einstein, stunned, reportedly said in German, "Daran habe ich gar nicht gedacht." I hadn't thought of that. Einstein agreed to sign a letter to Roosevelt. Szilard drafted the text, and Einstein signed it on August 2, 1939. The letter warned that uranium could be used to create extremely powerful bombs of a new type, and urged the United States to accelerate nuclear research. The Einstein-Szilard letter was delivered to Roosevelt on October 11, 1939, by economist Alexander Sachs, a Roosevelt advisor. The outbreak of World War II on September 3, 1939, had delayed delivery, but Sachs emphasized the urgency. Roosevelt, grasping the implications, told Sachs, "This requires action." He appointed a committee to investigate, which eventually became the Manhattan Project. The letter is credited as the catalyst that launched the American atomic bomb program. Without Szilard's persistence and Einstein's signature, the United States might have delayed nuclear research, potentially allowing Germany to develop the bomb first. The letter changed history, though its consequences would haunt Szilard for the rest of his life. The American nuclear program began slowly, initial funding was minimal, and progress was incremental. Szilard, impatient with bureaucratic delays, pushed relentlessly for faster development. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States fully into the war, the program accelerated. Szilard and Fermi continued experiments at Columbia University, designing a nuclear reactor that would demonstrate a controlled chain reaction. They decided to use graphite as a moderator to slow neutrons, increasing the probability of fission. By late 1941, they had calculated that a reactor built with purified uranium and graphite could sustain a chain reaction. The project moved to the University of Chicago under Arthur Compton, who coordinated efforts to build the reactor. On December 2, 1942, in a squash court under the west stands of the Stagg Field at the University of Chicago, Enrico Fermi supervised the final test of Chicago Pile 1, the world's first nuclear reactor. The reactor was a crude structure of graphite blocks and uranium stacked 57 layers high, weighing over 700,000 pounds. Cadmium rods inserted into the pile absorbed neutrons, preventing the chain reaction from starting. At Fermi's direction, physicist George Wiles slowly withdrew the control rods. At 3:25 p.m., the Geiger counters clicked faster and faster as the chain reaction became self-sustaining. Fermi allowed it to run for 28 minutes, then ordered the rods reinserted, shutting down the reaction. Humanity had achieved controlled release of nuclear energy. Szilard's 1933 vision had become reality. Arthur Compton called James Conant, chairman of the National Defense Research Committee, with a coded message. "The Italian navigator has landed in the New World." Conant asked, "How were the natives?" Compton replied, "Everyone landed safe and happy." The success of Chicago Pile 1 proved that nuclear reactors could work, and that plutonium, a new element created in reactors, could fuel atomic bombs. The Manhattan Project, now fully funded and prioritized, began constructing massive reactors at Hanford, Washington, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to produce plutonium and enrich uranium. Szilard, who had envisioned the chain reaction 9 years earlier, watched as his theoretical concept became an industrial-scale weapons program. By 1945, the Manhattan Project had produced enough fissile material for several atomic bombs. Germany surrendered in May 1945, eliminating the original justification for the bomb's development. Szilard, who had pushed so hard to build the bomb before Germany, now urged that it not be used against Japan. He argued that demonstrating the bomb's power to international observers, rather than dropping it on a city, would be sufficient to convince Japan to surrender. In July 1945, Szilard drafted a petition to President Harry Truman, urging him to inform Japan of the bomb's existence and give them a chance to surrender before using it. 70 scientists signed the petition, but it never reached Truman. Military officials intercepted it, and General Leslie Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, ensured it remained buried in classified files. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing an estimated 70,000 people instantly and injuring tens of thousands more. 3 days later, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki, killing approximately 40,000. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, ending World War II. Szilard was devastated. He had conceived the chain reaction, convinced Einstein to write to Roosevelt, and worked tirelessly to develop the bomb. believing it was necessary to prevent Nazi Germany from acquiring such a weapon. Instead, the bomb had been used against Japan, a nation that posed no nuclear threat, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Szilard felt personally responsible. The weapon he had helped create had become an instrument of mass destruction, not the deterrent he had envisioned. After the war, Szilard dedicated himself to preventing nuclear proliferation and advocating for international control of atomic energy. In 1946, he and Einstein founded the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, which included Linus Pauling and other prominent scientists, to educate the public about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Szilard argued that nuclear weapons made war between major powers suicidal, and that international cooperation was essential to prevent catastrophe. He wrote prolifically, proposing arms control agreements, international inspections, and treaties to limit nuclear testing. His efforts were largely unsuccessful. The Cold War arms race escalated, and both the United States and Soviet Union built arsenals containing thousands of nuclear weapons. Szilard transitioned from physics to biology in the 1950s, believing that biological research offered more positive contributions to humanity than the weapons development. He conducted research on aging and cancer, applying his inventive mind to problems of life rather than destruction. He died of a heart attack on May 30, 1964, in La Jolla, California, at age 66. His obituaries mentioned his role in the Manhattan Project, but few understood the full scope of his contributions or the moral burden he carried. Szilard had conceived the chain reaction, initiated the American atomic bomb program, and then spent the rest of his life trying to prevent the weapons he had helped create from destroying civilization. Szilard's story is a tragedy of unintended consequences. He conceived the chain reaction out of scientific curiosity and a desire to understand nature. He pursued its development out of fear that Nazi Germany would build the bomb first. He succeeded in launching the Manhattan Project, ensuring that the United States developed atomic weapons before any potential enemy. But the bomb was used not against Germany, which had surrendered, but against Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Szilard's vision of a deterrent weapon that would prevent war became a weapon of annihilation that ended one. The gap between intention and outcome haunted him. The patent Szilard filed in 1934 was one of the most significant documents in history. Though it remained classified and unknown for decades, it described in precise technical terms how to create a nuclear chain reaction and harness it for energy or weapons. Szilard tried to keep the concept secret, assigning the patent to the British Admiralty, but information leaked. By 1939, physicists worldwide understood the principles. Szilard's attempt to control knowledge by patenting it failed, demonstrating the futility of trying to keep scientific discoveries secret. Once an idea is conceived and published, even in classified form, it spreads. Other scientists, working independently, reached the same conclusions. The chain reaction was not Szilard's alone, it belonged to physics. Szilard's relationship with the American government and military was contentious. He was outspoken, abrasive, and unwilling to defer to authority. Military officials found him difficult and distrusted his motives. Szilard, in turn, despised military bureaucracy and secrecy. He believed scientists had a moral responsibility to influence how their discoveries were used, a position that put him at odds with General Groves and other Manhattan Project leaders. Groves considered Szilard a security risk and attempted to have him removed from the project. Only Szilard's indispensability and the intervention of other scientists prevented his expulsion. The tension reflected a deeper conflict between scientific openness and military secrecy, between moral responsibility and obedience to authority. The Einstein-Szilard letter of August 2, 1939 is often described as the most important letter in history. Without it, the United States might not have pursued atomic weapons until after Germany or Japan had developed them. The letter's timing, just weeks before World War II began, ensured that Roosevelt took it seriously. Had it arrived earlier, it might have been dismissed as speculative. Had it arrived later, events might have overtaken it. Szilard's persistence in drafting the letter, recruiting Einstein, and ensuring its delivery demonstrated his understanding of how to navigate bureaucracy and politics. He recognized that scientific arguments alone would not persuade politicians, but a letter from Einstein would command attention. Szilard's petition to Truman in July 1945, urging that the atomic bomb not be used without warning, reflected his growing realization that the bomb was not the defensive weapon he had envisioned. Japan was already defeated, its navy destroyed, its cities under constant bombardment. Szilard argued that using the bomb would initiate a nuclear arms race, set a precedent for attacking civilians, and undermine efforts to establish international control of atomic energy. His arguments were prescient. The Cold War nuclear arms race, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons to multiple nations all followed from the decision to use atomic bombs against Japan. But in July 1945, military and political leaders were focused on ending the war quickly, not on long-term consequences. Szilard's petition was ignored. The success of Chicago Pile 1 on December 2, 1942, vindicated Szilard's 1933 insight. The chain reaction worked exactly as he had predicted. Neutrons released by fission triggered more fission, releasing energy in a controlled, self-sustaining process. The reactor operated at low power, producing only about half a watt, but it proved the principle. Larger reactors at Hanford and Oak Ridge, built using the same design, produced kilowatts and eventually megawatts, generating plutonium for bombs and later electricity for cities. Every nuclear power plant in operation today traces its lineage to Chicago Pile 1, which traces its lineage to Szilard's moment of inspiration on a London street corner in 1933. Szilard never sought fame or credit. He filed patents not for recognition, but to control information and fund his research. He collaborated freely, sharing ideas with Fermi, Einstein, Wigner, and others. He proposed the Einstein letter not to elevate himself, but to save lives. After the war, he campaigned for nuclear disarmament, not to burnish his reputation, but because he felt responsible for the weapon's existence. Szilard's motivations were complex. Scientific curiosity, fear of Nazi Germany, moral responsibility, and a desire to shape the future. He succeeded in launching the atomic age, but failed to control its direction. The weapons he helped create proliferated beyond any possibility of restraint. The dual nature of nuclear energy, its potential for both power and destruction, exemplified the dilemma Szilard faced. The chain reaction could generate electricity, power ships, or destroy cities. The same physics that enabled reactors enabled bombs. Szilard understood this from the beginning, which is why he tried to keep the concept secret in 1934. But secrecy was impossible. Once the principle was understood, the applications followed inevitably. Szilard's tragedy was recognizing this inevitability and being unable to prevent it. He set in motion a process that transformed the world, creating technologies that could save or destroy civilization, and he spent the rest of his life grappling with the consequences. The man who tried to patent a secret became the man who unlocked the atom. The physicist who warned governments in the 1930s became the activist who warned the world in the 1950s. Szilard's life was defined by his 1933 insight, the moment when he understood that matter contained vast energy and that releasing it would change everything. He was right. The chain reaction concept led directly to the Manhattan Project, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons, to the Cold War and the constant threat of annihilation. Szilard conceived it, Einstein signed the letter that launched it, and the world was never the same. The secret Szilard tried to patent became the force that defined the 20th century.